Hello, everyone. I thought I would talk about the snobbishness around author attribution and some of my problems with it because, of course, throughout time there have been lay people as well as certain scholars who have doubted whether or not certain authors wrote the works attributed to them. And there are many reasons why people do that, and I couldn't possibly go through them all today, but I just wanted to address one argument that a lot of people use in their skepticism, but that I just don't think works as an argument. I think it's a terrible argument and just a terrible way of thinking because it holds, to me at least, several moral connotations to it. And this is the argument that an author couldn't have written their work if they came from a poor or illiterate background. Now, that argument reeks of snobbishness and classism and condescension. And the reason why it does is just because you can make assessments or judgments about a certain class of people, that doesn't mean that you can judge an individual within that class of people. Not only is that kind of thinking fallacious, but it also reeks of classism and snobbery. The idea that someone couldn't have written a great work of literature just because they came from a poor or illiterate background. And so I have problems with scholars who do that, and especially when people do that with authors like Shakespeare or even Homer. In the case of Homer, it's likely that because Homer was blind, it's very likely that Homer told the Odyssey orally, and then it was written down later by other Greeks. Or even with the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm not arguing for the divinity of of those texts today. I'm just saying that I think that trying to say that someone didn't write a certain work because of their so-called educational background, I just think it's demonstrably fallacious and reeks of classism. And because, first of all, especially when there are gaps around a person's life, when you don't know a lot about what that person did, um, then you have no right to make judgments or assessments about it because, okay, just because there's no documentary evidence that someone went to school, they still could have gone to school, and or even if they didn't go to school, they could have learned informally through either a friend or meeting an educated person, on their travels, and they could have taught them. You don't know, or in some cases, people can learn just through sheer talent and will. There are people, for example, who can teach themselves to read if they come from low education backgrounds. Lincoln, for example, Abraham Lincoln had almost no formal education, and yet because he was really interested in reading, because very often the reason people don't learn things if they come from a poor or illiterate background is sometimes because that desire is not instilled within them in that culture. But if someone can overcome that, then they can teach themselves to do great things. Like, for example, I taught myself to become vastly superior at reading, and that didn't happen through the formal education system. For example, when I was in the fifth grade, I was almost illiterate. I had like a first grade reading level, but through reading the classics, and through reading and writing on my own, not because anyone else taught me, I was able to improve vastly and surpass a lot of my peers. And yet, if one wanted to construct a case that I didn't write my work, you could probably do it. You could say, for example, that a lot of my early writing, my handwriting was really bad. Of course, it still is. Well, he had really horrible handwriting, just like Shakespeare had an awful signature. Therefore, he didn't write the works attributed to him. And so you could do that even with me if you wanted to. And so, again, so I just think that this kind of mindset reeks of classism and snobbery, and I think that both lay people, because some people think, oh, if a scholar says so, it must be right. But here's the thing: scholars can have prejudices when it comes to evaluating things, and scholarship is certainly not infallible. And many times throughout history, scholars have been influenced by the common prejudices of their time, and they bring that to the texts when they're evaluating them. And so, no, but I just think this line of thinking needs to stop because it does ultimately a disservice to the writers who wrote these works.